This is Supply Chain Breakdown, and today's panel will be breaking down the KPIs that matter most to your supply chain performance. You know who I am. I'm Conor, Marketing Director here at Lokad. To my left, as always, Joannes Vermorel, Lokad's founder. And special guest today joining us remotely is Patrick McDonald. He's Executive Advisor at Evolution Analytics, and he brings to today's panel about 30 years of very relevant experience. So, Patrick, first of all, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Conor. It's so great to be here.
Perfect. Good to have you. Now, before we start, this is a live chat. This panel is here at the behest of our audience. So if you have any questions or comments, get them in. Do you think that forecast accuracy is an important KPI for your supply chain? Why? What about service levels? Don't get us started. But let's move on. Patrick, as the guest, we come first to you. So before we get into the weeds of deconstructing KPIs, we're all logicians here. So I think the first question should be, what exactly do you see as the goal of supply chain decision making? And then later we can talk about KPIs for measuring the efficacy of that.
Right, and I think that's a really important question. I've done, as I said, 30 years of management consulting and data science work. Getting that question answered correctly is often a lot more difficult than you might think. We come in and we say, what is exactly we're trying to do here? And I think pretty much routinely, the answer is we're trying to make a decision about how to allocate a resource. Very often that's about how, where we're going to be positioning inventory. In some other contexts, it might be where we're going to focus our efforts, how we're going to allocate our staff time, et cetera. But from a supply chain perspective, it's very much how are we going to allocate the inventory, and that's the core decision that we're trying to make. And I think you have to look at the decisions that you're making in that context in order to be able to really focus on and get the best results. So that's something I've tried to do over the course of my career, and that's what we're going to get into today. So looking forward to it.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And Joannes, I know you prefer to focus on optimizing service levels in isolation, right? That's the goal of supply chain for you. I'm paraphrasing, right?
Not quite. Not quite. I really appreciate the approach of Patrick, which is focus on the decisions, and most specifically my own take is that supply chain is a applied branch of economics, and so it's we have a series of challenges that are the allocation of scarce resources. So inventory, I mean, first you have your money that you need to spend on what do you buy. That would be once you spend $1 on something, you can spend it on something else. Then if you have your raw materials and you consume them to produce anything, as soon as it's consumed, again, it's gone. And if you move a piece of inventory of a finished product from one place A to place B, as soon as it's moved, it's not available anymore on place B. And you have those scarce resources that should be made maximally useful for the company. And then when we get to what do we mean by actually making the best use of those scarce resources, the very, very short answer, terse answer even, is maximize the rate of return. So you want to essentially, for every dollar or dollar equivalent of resource that you put to any use, make sure that you have the maximum amount of dollars in return. So you want to maximize effectively the rate of return.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Back to you. Do you align with that perspective on like supply chain fundamentally is an applied branch of economics?
I think absolutely. Right. So I think the approach that I've taken over the last few years is a concept from that branch that isn't maybe published very well. It's called value of information. So the work that I tend to do is to help answer the question from a data science perspective. We might use a forecast as an insight. Right. And based on that, we're going to make a decision about how we're going to place inventory. So we're going to do that. Then we can make a prediction based on our model. If we place the inventory there, what are sales likely to be? Right. If I know what my sales are likely to be, then I can also say what is my inventory level likely to be. If I know that, then I can calculate what my KPIs are likely to be. If I know my KPIs, I can then calculate what my financial line items are likely to be. So I've been in the process for the last several years of looking at that entire chain. And typically what I'll do is I'll do a Monte Carlo analysis based on the uncertainty level that we have in the forecast. And that's one of the key things, right? People chase that point accuracy, which I don't really care that much about at all. I care much, much more about the actual probability mass function or the density function around the forecast itself. So I'm leveraging that. I'm doing Monte Carlo analysis, and I'm following that chain all the way from the insight through the decision, through the KPIs to the financial statements. And it allows me to really understand what's happening and do simulation and look at possible outcomes with an understanding of the likelihood of those happening, and being able to do that all the way to financial statements that you can then take into the boardroom and say, okay, if you're going to make these kinds of decisions, here's the kind of outcomes that you can expect. And then we can go back and we can actually measure actual versus expected, and have some real value. And I've just found that to be a much better approach than what I see most companies do, which varies from really simple spreadsheet stuff, looking at linear regression, trying to get a line, to more sophisticated forecasting and trying to chase the individual forecasting accuracy. Does that make sense?
Yep. Well, Joannes, does that make sense?
It does. It's very, very aligned with the way Lokad itself approach supply chains. Indeed there is even a duality between any kind of simulator, so Monte Carlo techniques, and probabilistic forecasting with direct density modeling. If you have something that can generate many deviates about the future, you can reconstruct the probability the probability densities, and if you have the probability densities, then you can generate deviates that reflect those. Right. So you can go back and forth. Sometimes it's more practical to use one versus another, but that's more like I would say a technical aspect rather than a high level thinking aspect. The intention on both is the same. The intention is the same, and yes, the idea is we really want to connect the thing end to end to the financial outcome. You have many steps, but fundamentally all those steps are like numerical artifacts that are just means to an end. The end being the financial outcome that you want to maximize for the company.
Well, okay, so I heard a lot of mathematical terms. Perfect. I understand them, but I also want to keep this somewhat more grounded. So if we come back, Patrick, to the point, we seem to be in complete unanimity, total consensus that economic impact, that's what you should be looking at. So supply chain is applied economics. Okay, to somebody who says, well, hold on, Patrick, if we keep pushing for higher and higher levels of forecast accuracy and higher service levels, we're going to maximize the economic return of our supply chain. Like, how could better numbers, better forecast accuracy, and better service levels not translate to better economic performance?
Right. And I know that's counterintuitive, but it's just not true. There's a mathematical principle. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go just a little bit math wonky on you here, called Jensen's inequality, that helps us understand why that's not true. And there are a couple of key pieces. First, if you're looking at traditional accuracy metrics, it's weighted equal sides. If you're too high or too low, it's going to be weighted the same. But that's not what we have in inventory. The value of information model says if I lose the sale, I lose all my margin, right? If I have too much, then I just have the carrying cost of inventory. So already I've got an asymmetry around there that I need to account for. And so typically I will do that kind of value weighting on my accuracy metrics anyway. The other thing that we miss is that we know there's uncertainty inherent in the forecast, inherent in the future outcome, and that uncertainty is basically tied up in that density function. Now you can handle that in a number of ways. The simplest way, we've done it for years and years, is just to understand standard deviation and try to use that and set some boundaries with a couple of aspects. That was good back in the day when we had really limited capabilities for calculation. But now I can do I can do on my personal MacBook now stuff that would have taken a Cray supercomputer back when I was in college. So our calculation capability is just so much greater today than it was, that we can do so much more. So we need to look both at that value of information function, and we also need to look at the shape of that probability density function, and that's where I think some key metrics kind of come into play. And I think one of the things that if you'll indulge me just for a minute, I'll tell a little bit of a story about how I first got involved in this and where I was first looking at it, and why it became so important to me over the course of my career. I was just starting out, and we were building out a data warehouse for McDonald's. I was a consultant with Persico. And it was 1997, so that tells you how old I was. It was the first year they did the Teeny Beanie Baby promotion. I don't know if you remember those or not, but it was huge. It made the news. People were buying the Happy Meals, throwing away the food just to get the toy. There was a poor guy that was a delivery guy that got assaulted because somebody tried to steal the Teeny Beanie Babies. Made the national news. Was a big deal. Well, we came in basically Monday morning, that first week of the promo, and the business execs were in our face saying, we need a store run-out date report. Right, because they were flying through the Teeny Beanie Baby so fast. It's their promotional item. It's got to be cheap. It drives a whole market basket, right? It's got to be cheap. They order them from China, so they got to do it a year in advance. They had a fixed amount, no opportunity for replenishment. If your promotion lasts as long as it lasts, when you're out of Teeny Beanie Babies, promotion's over, down go sales, right? So we did the report for them, and sure enough, they ran out in about a week and a half. Right. So was that a good promotion or not? I think yes, potentially, but think about it. Your sales were 4 times what you thought they were going to be for a week and a half, and then they plummeted to below normal because you had no promotion for the remaining 3 weeks of the month. So they came back to us and they said, "Oh, well, how many should we order next year?" And we said, "Well, 4 times as much." And the decision was, no, that's way too much. We'll do twice as much. And the next year they ran out in 2.5 weeks. So those are the kinds of things that I think where I started to understand. And part of the challenge they had was they couldn't get good forecasts. So we wrote what was called an interim forecasting system for them, and it ran for 18 years. So it was supposed to just be there until they got something better, and it was calculating Happy Meal toys and McDonald's burger patties for 18 years. And I think the thing that really bugged me is the forecasting vendors would come in and say, I could get you better accuracy, and if I give you better accuracy, you'll get better business results. And to me, it was kind of like I think it was the Gary Larson Far Side cartoon where, guy's standing in front of the board with all the equations on it, and he points to the spot in the middle that's unexplained and said, and then a miracle happens. I could never really connect the dots from those things until I figured out how to do this value chain with value of analytic or value of information all the way through the chain to be able to model it. So that's been kind of the path of my career, and one of the things that I've been working on over the course of that 30 years that I've been doing data science. So,
well, thank you again, Joannes. I mean that dovetails very much into your perspective in your book On the Table. I know, and I'm quoting the terms you refer to: accuracy and service level as distractions, poor proxies, and one of your favorite terms, numerical artifacts. Now, in simple terms, why do you feel this way? And I presume it's some version of what Patrick has just said.
I mean, fundamentally, if you look at service level, it is first it's a very mathematical construct in the sense that fundamentally it is a percentage that do not reflect any kind of economic value for the business. So first thing is that whenever we have things that are percentage based, we have to be careful because it's fundamentally it's not clear at all that this thing is rooted in anything real for the business. It's that's the trick, that it may sound like being very scientific because you have measurements and whatnot, but is it? And I really appreciate, the comment of Patrick, and a miracle happen, and bam, it's
Right.
yeah. I mean, you have your percentage, but how does that connect to profitability? And a miracle happen, and maybe, but maybe not. So I think the danger is that whenever you have those percentages, you have the danger of scientism. It looks like science. There is number, is metric. You can have even, a very precise percentage, 97.17. That make it like extra rational. But it doesn't. It's still a percentage, and it's not clear that it's connected at all to the long-term interest of the company. Now, we have another thing that, okay, if we go back to those service levels, we can have the descriptive aspect and the prescriptive aspect. Descriptive is I look back. The problem is that if I look back for a given SKU, and I am typically a relatively high quality of service, I can have many SKUs that are at 100%. That doesn't tell me much, because what if, for example, this Beanie Baby toy, before the promotion started, for all eternity, it was like 100% or undefined. So in terms of descriptive, it was not very useful. And then when you go to zero, because you go to zero sales because you don't have any more, the service level doesn't differentiate if you're missing out from 1 unit or 1 million. So if you see, that's also another problem, is that if it says I'm stuck out, yes, but it's really not the same thing to be stuck out because I sold 100 and I was short of 1 unit and I am stuck out, versus I sold 1 and I missed 100 and I was stuck out.
Right.
So again, it doesn't. So again, in terms of descriptive, it doesn't tell the story. And then if we say in terms of prescriptive perspective, like what should I be looking for in terms of service level? It's exactly as you described. It's the asymmetries in terms of economics are not taken into account. If I have something that can, like McDonald, have a double digit a percentage impact on growth of my sales, so I can substantially increase my sales, and it costs me a few cents per meal to have this toy from China. This is highly asymmetric. It means that with a limited investment, I can have like a massive uptake. In this sort of situation, you would say, you know what, those plastic toys, they are not perishable, they are very cheap, the upside is super high. Maybe I should take the risk of running over stocks, and if things don't go well, I would just, liquidate them over time. Clients will not be, for example, if let's imagine at McDonald, worst case, clients will get 2 toys with their meal for a month. And probably, even if the second toy is not that great, it probably I will not piss off that many customers by if the Happy Meal has a second toy in it. So I can see that the risk that I'm taking in having too much is not that huge, as long as the cost % per meal is kind of under control.
Right. Exactly. And I think I love the way, first of all, that you talk about accuracy as a mathematical artifact, right? I think basically I've looked at it a little bit differently. I call it one of the seductive 6. I have 6 assumptions that data scientists make that we shouldn't all the time. One of them is local versus global optima, right?
Yes.
So if you're saying it's a numerical artifact, if I focus on accuracy, I'm focusing on a local, mathematical, artificial optimum, rather than what I should be focusing on, which is how can I maximize how much cash flow or profit am I going to be making, right? That's local versus global. So I think very much the key point. I think the other thing that comes to mind when we talk about this is, what decision are you really trying to make? And I love the thinking of it. I think about inventory decisions a lot like playing poker, right? You are pushing your chips in on the table to make a bet based on uncertain information. You want to have as much information as you can, and there is a risk element to it. And I think my current client is over in the Netherlands. They're a software as a service company where for retail they do forecasting and help smaller retailers position their inventory. And one of the things that they found in their forecasting applications was they went after accuracy first and found that that was not the most important thing for their particular retailers. The most important thing was being able to predict whether or not they were going to stock out. Because retailers are going to ship. If you have an item of clothing, you're going to have one of them in a style and color and a size, typically maybe a couple, but not more than that. You ship once a week. Do you replenish or not, right? You've got it in the warehouse. It's sitting there. There's not a lot of difference in terms of operating expense, whether it's sitting in the warehouse or sitting in the store. But you don't want too much stuff on the floor of the store, but you want to have enough. So their forecasting capability is really geared and targeted towards being able to understand, okay, am I going to sell that one unit? Do I stock out? And that's how they answer the question, do I go ahead and push inventory from the DC to the retail outlet? And it's a very good approach because they're answering a different question rather than trying to say, okay, how many am I going to sell? And can I hit that number specifically and exactly? It's, do I make the decision to ship or not? Really understanding that gets to the point of which question you're trying to answer, and that means which metric am I going to use, right? So they're looking at recall and precision much more closely around a categorical decision. Am I going to stock out or not? Being much more important than the numerical one. How much am I going to sell? So that's another type of metric that I think sometimes we need to look at from a forecasting perspective that gives us better information in terms of the kinds of decisions we're actually going to be making. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. You see, and there is another benefit if you start looking at decision is that, for example, the demand forecast, the problem is that depending on how you operate, there might not even be any good answer, any accurate answer. An example, you have your fashion retail network.
Right.
They have at the end of the collection, at the end of the season, they have the opportunity to do discount to liquidate the current collection. So if you say, I forecast this level of demand, the question is that at which price point are you forecasting? You see, and there is the current price, but there is also the option of doing a discount. And now you have to look at the various strategies, which is if I keep the unit in the warehouse until the end of the season, I will have to push it somewhere and do a discount. If I push it into the store, I may have the opportunity to sell it before the end of the season, before I have to do a discount. But maybe this particular store, in terms of market power when it comes to discount, maybe the clientele locally is very poor and unresponsive to discount for this specific store comparatively to the others. You see, it makes several things, your local versus global thing, but also the fact that what I wanted to point out was that if you think of the future as something as static, you remove all the agencies that you have to shape this future as you walk the path in the future. So what I'm saying is that the problem with the forecasting first mindset is that it removes all the agencies that the company might have, because you're essentially saying, this is the plan, that becomes a commitment, and this is what we're doing, instead of thinking this is the right decision, and I keep many options available to accommodate I would say this decision that I'm taking right now. I don't need to be committed myself beyond the decision. The decision that I'm taking is my only commitment. The rest remains open. And that's the problem with the forecasting, is that it tends to lock the company into a trajectory that is completely blind to any optionality, such as, what if you want to do a transfer later on between stores? Maybe that's an option. Maybe it's not. But if you think in terms of decision, that's something that comes very naturally. If you think in terms of forecasting, especially time series forecast, this is something that is almost impossible to express.
Right. Well, and my current client Ware is actually doing some of that, right? So they have a transfer module. So they look at, okay, do I transfer these this particular variant from one store to another because it's more likely to sell there. We also are doing some analysis on the pricing. We did basic price elasticity analysis, looking at it and saying, okay, if I do a discount, am I going to get more volume or am I just giving away margin? And we're starting to be able to answer that question. So I think a lot of those things are very, very relevant. I love that you talk a little bit about whether it's dynamic or kind of a static thing. That's number 4 of my sacred 6 that we think about all the time. We look at everything as a static equilibrium problem, and most things are dynamic, right? Yes. So absolutely, I think those are critical kinds of decisions, and we need to take that optionality into account. I think the other area that we don't think about enough is, and even I haven't gotten to this yet because the problem is fairly complicated, and I know there are some other people that have worked on it, is there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of delivery time, right? Your suppliers, particularly if you're in manufacturing, and you have a whole bill of materials that we're waiting on, you have supply coming in and you have to wait on that. Sometimes they deliver on time, sometimes they don't, and there's uncertainty there that needs to be modeled. And I know, that there are folks that do a pretty good job of doing some of that, but I think we have more capability from a calculation perspective now to be able to look at that at a little more depth. So I think there's opportunities even on the supply side in terms of understanding what that looks like and where it goes. So.
Yes, I mean that's exactly. I've even have lectures, by the way, on that, on probabilistic lead time modeling on YouTube, and yes, and Lokad, we have built technologies for quite a few years now to combine many sources of uncertainty, and that's why typically the classic accuracy falls flat on its face because. It's very difficult due to those asymmetrical concern, and you're combining many uncertainties, each one having their own asymmetries that can be quite counterintuitive, and they can combine. For example, lead times tend to have it's typically, the way I say it is that most lead time distributions are bimodal. You have a mode, a peak for the normal expected date when everything goes smooth, and then you have the tail that is super long when things do not go according to plan. It's even very frequently a distribution that doesn't even have an average because some stuff gets never delivered. So mathematically, not even an average. It's a bit strange. But in addition to that, the case where the delivery times tend to completely go off the charts is when you pass a bigger order, which is unsurprising. You pass a big order, unusual, and then your supplier is like, struggle, problem.
Exactly.
So you have correlations. And what I'm just saying is that, okay, if the classic supply chain paradigm that thinks in terms of accuracy with percentages all over the place, I mean, when you combine all those effects, you realize that what can cost you money is absolutely not obvious from a percentage viewpoint, because you may end up with very dumb things, such as if you have a product that is fresh and perishable, and that you're going to sell at Christmas, let's say oyster, it's incredibly time sensitive. And if you miss, Christmas and New Year, you're toast. You will be selling whatever you have at 80% discount, and that's could be the best case. So everything is not. You don't have this alignment of planets to hurt you that way, but very frequently you have plenty of edge cases. You have like a forest of edge cases where so many products have their own edge cases. And that's why I was going back to initially to say we need to tie everything to dollars at the end, or euros. It's because when you combine those uncertainties, you realize that the weakness of your predictive model can be very counterintuitive. It might be things that on surface it looks like, a statistician would say, it looks fairly accurate and well calibrated, but you realize that no, you end up with problems. Just an example of that would be, for example, if you rerun your logic every day to know if you want to pass a purchase order, if one day out from, let's say, China, and one day out of 100, so 1% chance, the thing just spike just due to numerical instability. It means that you will be passing something like 3 orders per year to your supply in China just because of numerical instability of your model, just because today it spiked, and then you're chasing like a ghost. It's a numerical artifact that was just the numerical instability of your model on that day. But accuracy-wise, if these sort of problems only happen once, 1% of the time, it will not even appear in your average accuracy because it will be completely dwarfed by other stuff. So that's what I'm saying is that the sort of weaknesses of your predictive model needs to be assessed in dollars, because otherwise you have things that looks insignificant for most percentage-based metrics, but once you look at them in dollars, you realize, oh crap, this thing that looks small, in fact, it's not small, it's big, because I forgot my ratchet effect, for example, on the purchase orders made from this supplier in China.
Right, and I think we've begun to kind of think about that. Taleb talked about it first in his book Black Swan.
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with that. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
We have gray swans and black swans. I have what I call purple swans, which are really weird looking distributions that happen because of certain things that are pretty unique. They're those edge cases. They don't fit a standard distribution. They're not numerically describable. I have to use a real probability density function, which is just and use it as an array of values, right?
Yes.
In order to describe it. But the first example I had of that was we were doing a forecasting solution for a proof of concept for an aerospace company.
Yes.
And they asked me to calculate safety stock, and that was something I hadn't done before, and I looked at it a bit differently. I leveraged Sam Savage's work out of Stanford with probability management, and he's got a little Excel tool that allows you to basically do calculations with probability density functions. So I did something really simple. I took the prediction interval for the forecast, and I used just a basic one, so it was just a normal distribution. And it was the first time I actually did this mapping of value of information model all the way through, and said, okay, based on that, how do I set my safety stocks? And I started looking at it, and I was looking at an individual time series, and pretty much normal distribution, normal distribution, normal distribution. All of a sudden, I see this one I've never seen before, and it looks like this. Boom, right? And I'm, what the heck is that? And I figured it out. What I had done was I had in there a function where I said my sales are the minimum of my stock level for demand, right? The demand was a normal distribution. Stock level was right here. And if demand exceeded stock level, the distribution, the tail pops up. Well, that's just your stock out risk. And I was able to see that 11 months in advance by looking at that probability distribution. So that's an example of kind of a purple swan. And I think, in terms of your point, when we're chasing that accuracy, the thing that so many of us do is we'll take that accuracy metric in isolation. We calculate a prediction interval, but we throw it out and we don't use it. And using that and putting it into simulation is where you start to actually see those edge cases manifest and can get a better understanding. So.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. For example, for aerospace, it's very interesting because we have done so much. And a few examples. The problem is that also accuracy locks you into the time series perspective, which is extra wrong in this case. For example, one of our first discovery when we were working in the aerospace was to discover the concept of retrofits. So you have parts that are being demanded because you need a repair. So a part has to come in, but then you realize that you have retrofits, which are parts where the OEM says you need to push those parts, those new parts as replacement to the aircraft because we don't trust the old parts anymore. So in your time series, you're mixing, in fact, 2 different types of units: the one that are pulled for repairs, the one that are pushed for retrofits. But then that's not the end. Just another element would be when we look at the demand for aerospace, very frequently, you have the aircraft, they need to complete the repair within, let's say, 8 hours for the small maintenance. And as a result, the crew are going to ask for a lot more parts than what they actually need, because they will have only 8 hours to do the repair. So they would say, we need 100 of those parts. But then you will have the next day a massive amount of parts being returned but not used.
Right.
And and so you need to understand your demand signal, where it's and again, those things are not like super complicated, but that means that they need to be taken into account, and you need to have the sort of I would say aerospace friendly perspective in this thing to really understand, okay, what are they trying to do? They are trying to repair a plane. They have concerns for the timing of their operation, so they need to ask a little bit more, and they will return a lot of things, and some parts are actually demanded by the crew. Some are actually pushed by the OEM, so we have nuance here to take into account, etc., etc. And that's why all those ideas, unlike, I would say, percentage, they comes, you see, that the key difference is that if I go for accuracy, that's a percentage that comes from the world of statistics, which is essentially a branch of pure mathematics. And all those things that I've just described, they comes from the understanding on how do you get an aircraft to be repaired in the first place. It's different domain of knowledge. And what in my message here when it comes to those indicators is that as a rule of thumb, you have to be extremely suspicious for any indicators that comes right from the world of mathematics, pure mathematics, as opposed to something that is really driven by a very precise understanding of what is it that you're trying to achieve on the ground. But unfortunately, most of the KPIs that I see comes from the world of mathematics, usually because they are so much easier to define. And yes, it's if we go back to aerospace, it's a kind of a crappy situation where the crew say, I want 100, you have only 80, but in the end they return 30. Was it like, did you satisfy the demand? Yes, no. Yes, the crew was very tense because they thought that they were maybe going to lack, but in the end they didn't lack. So that's the sort of things where, but it's interesting discussion, and you see that suddenly we are into the nitty-gritty detail of understanding the situation, as opposed to say mean square error versus MAPI versus absolute error versus etc. Or the, I would say, the theoretical criteria.
Well, gentlemen, on that actual note, I think we have thoroughly denunciated what you would both see as the mainstream approach to tracking performance, but what remains a little bit fuzzy, I think, is what we're proposing as an alternative. So, for example, to come back to Patrick, you said, again, chasing forecast accuracy in isolation, fool's errand. Let's just say, let's grant that for the sake of discussion. Okay, but then what are we supposed to be tracking? And saying just track money, that's a bit unclear to people, as I'm sure you understand. So what is the actual thesis that we're proposing or you're proposing to replace the traditional KPIs?
Right. Well, so I tend to do, again, what I call value of information analysis weighting, right? So I want to simulate that cash flow in terms of the decisions that we're actually being actually looking at and how we're making them. And to do that, you really have to have a clear understanding of that value of information model. So what's the cost of not making the sale if we're going to stock out? What is my holding cost associated with it? What does that uncertainty look like? Whether it's a forecast or a convolution with delivery times or whatever it is in your simulation, to model that and try to track that from here's my insight, here's the decision I'm going to make, this is the lever I'm going to throw in the business, this is where I'm going to set my positioning, this is where I'm going to set my effort, this is where I'm going to set that, what are the outcomes I expect, and do that simulation. Do the Monte Carlo analysis and look at what the probability distributions of the outcomes are going to be, and then measure your actual versus predicted. in terms of looking at that. So that's the approach that I've taken. It tends to work fairly well. It does require a bit of additional sophistication from your business executives. Business executives tend to want to think of things in very linear fashion and somewhat simplistic. So that's another one of my 6 projects, or one of my 6 things that I'm concerned about. But that's the approach that I take, and I think that's what I would really recommend is think about that value of information model and how you apply it. So now the traditional forecasting metrics, are they still helpful from a statistics perspective? Yeah, they can be. But I tend to try to weight them. I look at, like I say, a weighted precision, a weighted recall, a weighted pinball metric, I think is much more useful than an accuracy metric. Pinball allows you to kind of look at accuracy across the across that whole demand profile, that density function, and if you put it at the right position and put a value of information skew on it, and weight it properly, it can give you some insight towards that that value analysis that you're looking at, and these are things that I'm really only just now implementing. So I'm in the process of learning as I'm doing this stuff. It's been over the course of, like I say, 30 years of work, and every day I go into the office, I learn something new. So yep. So that's where I'm at, and that's the approach that I'm currently taking, and it appears to be having some real impact for some of my clients. So.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. And Joannes, again, same question. I presume you're coming at it from a very concrete financial perspective as well.
So I would say there are really 2 broad set of indicators that we typically generate and monitor for completely different purpose and different audience. So the first audience would be supply chain management, supply chain executives. For those, it will be essentially economic drivers. So we say we want to maximize the return on investment, so the rate of return of every decision. But we need to decompose that in a series of impact, cost of inventory, expected margin, expected cost of inventory write-off, stock out penalty. So we do this decomposition. And within this realm of, we have indicators that are, I would say, forward-looking. So they are dependent on the predictive model. And those that are just purely descriptive, they just look at what happens. So that here we're talking of maybe between, I would say, a dozen max of indicators, some that are purely descriptive, so descriptive statistics, some that are, in fact, embedding conditional to the correctness of the predictive model. For example, if I tell you this inventory carry a risk of inventory write-off of this many dollars, I've not observed this inventory write-off yet. So it is something that, in fact, it's some numbers that I'm building thanks to a predictive model of some kind. So that's I would say for the audience of executives and practitioners. And then we have a second set of indicators that are typically relatively monstrous. I mean, it can be hundreds of numbers for the data scientists themselves. And here we are typically looking at a sense that something can go wrong in the whole chain of processing. Because we are getting data, it's typically a haphazard process where we have dozens and dozens of tables that are extracted from ERPs, potentially multiple ones, a WMS, a CRM. So we consolidate a lot of stuff from the applicative landscape of the company. And there are so many things that can go wrong. For example, what if you suddenly, from one day to another, you have a variation of with 5% extra suppliers? Is it significant or not significant? Did someone, introduce duplicates or not? What about 20% more suppliers? Oh, okay, 20% is probably a duplicate or probably a bug or probably so you have to monitor plenty of things that are like the sort of issues that can creep along your data processing pipeline. And it's pretty much everything. You will monitor number of SKUs, number of suppliers. Even, for example, sometimes you try to identify things that are close to invariance that you could use to detect that there has been a bug in your data pipeline. Example of that, for example, an e-commerce of us selling car parts, we noticed years ago that it was an extremely stable, something like 2.5 parts per basket. And it was incredibly stable, during the summer, the winter, Christmas. It's super stable, 2.5 parts per basket. So that means that's good, that we have something super stable. The business might be fluctuating a lot, but in fact, this thing is very stable, which means that if we could have an analysis that just say, if we have a deviation on this, it probably means that we have a bug in the pipeline, that for example, the order lines have been dropped, that we only have like the first order line of every order or something nonsensical like that. So the supply chain scientists will compose a dashboard, but it's absolutely not really value driven. It is, from our perspective, what we call insanity driven. You want to keep an eye on all the stuff that can literally wreak havoc on your calculation and completely undermine your models. It can be a lot of dumb things. It can even be, for example, the ratio of letters and numbers in production, in description labels. Because if you have labels that suddenly are only made of numbers, most likely you don't have the correct labels anymore for the description. So you see, it's plenty of heuristics that are just there to make sure that the data that you process automatically at scale is still sane. And that is only of interest to what we call the supply chain scientist, because the supply chain scientist wants to make sure that every single day decisions at scale have like 0% insanity, which is what I define as something where anybody would look at those decisions and say, an insane decision, and say, oh no, that's crazy, you should not be doing that. Something went wrong somewhere in the data pipeline. For us, it's very important to make sure that this number of insane decision is 0. We can't be accurate, but we can eliminate the gross insanity.
Patrick, anything to add to that before I push on?
No, I just real quick, over the course of my career in data science, data accuracy and data quality has always been an issue, right? I've seen weird things, negative inventory levels. How do you have a negative inventory level, right? That doesn't make any sense. Had one client, a big FANG client, that the director of data centers would walk into a brand new data center, pull up his power report. It would say no power was being drawn, and he looks around, and of course all the machines are going and the lights are flashing, so he knows the report's wrong. What happened, right? So yeah, a lot of things can happen in the data processing perspective. I think statistical process control is something that can be used to kind of do some of that. It sounds like that's what you guys are using, and that's the right way to handle it. So great. Those are important things. So if you don't have good data, garbage in, garbage out still applies, and with big data, that means you're going to have a lot of garbage. So you have to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the thing is that the most puzzling thing is that the data is actually correct, just in a very, very weird way. For example, SAP decided 30 years ago that returns would be counted as negative sales.
Right.
Okay. So that means that you have days where you have negative sales. It just means that you had actually more returns and items being sold. And if you go for e-commerce in Germany, where the percentage of return is like 40% of your items being shipped are being returned, you will have tons of negative sales. But that's a very important information, except it's not a negative sale, it's a return. So that's the sort of things. And but I agree. I think we are on the same sense. Data is extremely messy, and it's very important to make sure that it stays under control.
Yeah, returns are always a big problem. So I have to deal with that a lot. Great.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I do have a closing question, but I'm going to push that to the end and instead prioritize some of the audience questions. So these are pulled from some direct messages, questions on this thread, but also an interesting question from last week that I think applies to today quite well. So I'll start with a question from Miguel Lara. This is to the panel, so Patrick, I'll go to you first. is there any KPI, or are there any KPIs that don't necessarily affect financial results, but you still would consider high impact? Or of some utility?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the standard metrics that we do look at are still important to look at. Right? So May is an important thing when you're when you're looking at and trying to understand how well a forecasting model is going to work. Right? Your MAPE or your Maze are also things that I will look at and use. And it's not that those aren't important metrics and that we don't think about them, but they're not the most important metric, and they're not the ones that we should chase. I think that's kind of the perspective that I would have. Understand what the metrics are telling you, and use them for their designated purpose, and don't make that and then a miracle happens assumption and apply those metrics to the assumption that you're going to get value out of it. Based in terms of financial value, when you apply those in ways in which they were not intended. So I guess that's my answer to that. Fit for purpose is something I try to keep in mind in everything that I do, and that's what I would recommend for a lot of those metrics. So,
all right. Thank you, Joannes. Same question. Do you need to repeat
I think for Lokad, the most important non-financial metric is the number of manual overrides per day for decisions that should be automated. That's the number one thing. So it's not financial, but for us, anything that is above zero is a problem. And we see that as a defect. And the problem is that when we have a defect, it means that our model is kind of wrong. And if it's wrong, then we can't even trust the economic modeling that we have, because by definition, if people are doing those overrides, it means that they see things that we don't. So all those economic measurements that we have might be completely undermined by this proof of incorrectness. So for us, that is the number one is those manual overrides, because whenever they happen, it means that there is something that we are getting wrong in the model itself, and thus potentially this something can undermine all the economic analysis end to end. So that's why we need to pay a lot of attention. We treat that as a bug, essentially. We treat that as a bug, and unless we understand the bug, we don't know how deep the rabbit hole is going.
I found that to be true too. So I guess the question I would have is that always the case when you found that almost all those overrides are wrong, or are there cases where somebody comes in and overrides and there's a problem with the model and we figured it out and fixed it?
The thing is that initially, when we start a project, very frequently, most of the overrides, unfortunately for us, are real. There are stuff that we have missed. There are stuff that we didn't understand. So when we get started, most of those overrides usually reflect stuff that we didn't know. For example, when we started aviation, that was like a decade and a half ago, I didn't know what was a retrofit, the importance of retrofits. And we had a lot of people tweaking numbers. And at some point I said, what is going on? They told us it's a retrofit. I said, what? And then, okay, so we back to the guy who did the modeling was very ignorant on something very important. But then over time, it can be anything. It can be a new guy that actually is overriding for no reason whatsoever. Just because he was used to override stuff in his previous company, he comes here and say, I should override, while actually it doesn't make any sense. But you see, I treat that, I would say, the percentage of critical report diminish a lot. But it's a little bit like when you're a software company, you have like a bug reports from users. You have a lot of reject. People will say, it's buggy. No, you just got the feature wrong. It's really the intended behavior, but nevertheless, we tend to monitor those very carefully, because I would say, according to Nassim Taleb, the occasional that proves to be correct can be very significant. So even if you say 99% are like the user is wrong, maybe this 1% turned out that it was very impacting. So that's why we keep an eye. I would say, for a mature project, the vast majority are essentially noise. but a few are not, and those are the ones we are really concerned about.
All right. Thank you. Now, I will push on. This next question was posted by, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Lucio Zonka. Now, this was on the safety stocks discussion from last week.
The
but
best.
very safety stocks. But no, it's very irrelevant, so I need to read it, and then there's two questions. So a little bit of context. Lucio pointed out that most supply chain managers' bonuses are tied to KPIs. So, for example, on time and full. And as a result, no one really gets fired for excess stock, only for bad on time and full. That naturally pushes or possibly incentivizes people to inflate inventories. In theory, we could size safety stocks using true economic costs per unit short, per stock out event, but those numbers are fuzzy, so companies default to simple KPIs. Now, the two questions. To whom, Patrick, do KPIs actually matter? And how should incentive structures be designed so that those metrics or KPIs don't basically reward people gaming the system? It's a difficult question, I know.
And no, it's not. It's a simple question that aggravates the heck out of me. The amount of incentives in conflict in major organizations that I've been in is mind-numbing, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges that I have, and a whole different topic. I have a different set of overall metrics that I think organizations should be looking at in terms of how they run their businesses. Metrics in conflict, particularly the ones that incentivize certain behaviors that are in conflict, is problematic. That's part of why we have sales and operations planning operations in supply chain, and they have their own problems for many reasons. Not the least of which is that everybody has what they call a forecast, and there are at least 7 different forecasts in each organization. One's a supply plan, one's a demand plan, one's a statistical forecast, one is the sales targets, one's the marketing plan, and one's a financial plan. They're all called the forecast. They don't reconcile, and then the organization wonders why they're out of alignment. Right. And part of the reason is you go back to the individual metrics that people's bonuses are based upon that incentivize their behavior. So yes, that is a huge problem. Fixing it is not a trivial challenge. It's a big management consulting sort of work, or a big management problem that needs to be dealt with. And it can be dealt with, but it's going to take some real leadership inside an organization to make that happen. So, does that got the first part of the question? What was the second part? Did I miss anything there?
KPIs matter. You've covered it. KPIs matter to who, or to whom do KPIs actually matter? And then how do you incentivize people not to game the system? And again,
you make sure your metrics are in alignment and they're not in conflict, right? That's how you do that.
All right, thank you. Joannes, same thoughts, or same questions, excuse me?
Yeah, my approach will be a little bit different. I forgot the name of this law, but essentially there is a corporate law that say any good metric that is established as a market, as a target, ceases to be a good metric.
It's Goodwin's law, no?
Yeah, Goodwin. And my take is that this idea that you can incentivize people on metrics is infantilization of your workforce. It's always going to backfire. People will always game the metric. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. So it is a sort of idea that looks good, but are invariably disastrous over time. It doesn't matter which metric. You see, people think, oh, if we pick the right metric, this time it will not be gamed. This time it will be good. This time it will be aligned with the long-term interests of the company. Turn out that no, it won't. I don't know how, but give it a few months to your team members, and they will find a way to make your life hell and your company less profitable by gaming the metric. Again, this is that's one of the greatest strengths of humans. Humans are ingenious. That's a good thing. Yeah. They are ingenious. So stuff will happen. Stuff will happen, and it will go wrong. So my suggestion is give up on this this sort of naive rational. It's for me. It's naive rationalism. It's to say, oh, what I only need to do is to have a very clear metric, and then people will maximize this metric. It will align with long-term interest. Problem solved. I don't have to manage people. I just have to follow. Let the incentive do the work for me as a manager. That is, again, for me, this is a very infantile view of human nature. Doesn't work like that.
Right.
Incentives are very powerful, but incentives, and that's something that Taleb, by the way, discussed a lot in his books, for example, not only Black Swan, but Anti-Fragile, are creatures that looks at second order, third order, fourth order. People will do something because they think their next employer will think better of them and this and that and that. So they can do things, but with a long plan that completely exceed your expectations. So it's those sort of, for me, approaching your staff with metrics is like first order reasoning. You don't take into account like second order, third order, extra. So bottom line, I would say, if you have those incentives in your company, the first priority should be just to remove them entirely, all of them. The only things that are kind of acceptable are like stock options. You know, you just take stock options, you vest them for 5 years. Yeah, fine. It's enough. It's close enough to the long-term interest of the company, and that's it. Keep it super simple and unspecific. And then, then you have to also, then you have to appreciate that when you start to do optimization, economic optimization, the half-life of your objective function is like 1 week. You see, it's your objective function is not something that you put on a pedestal and say, this is it, you know, this is, we have the thing. This thing will evolve a lot. For example, when administration Trump decided that tariff could be changed like 5 times a day, then suddenly the game was changed. And there has been, 400 tariff updates in the US since the beginning?
We're all being very anti-fragile right now.
Yeah.
We have to be, right?
Yes. So that's the sort of things where, okay, new rules. The objective functions is moving. It's now we introduce, you know, probabilistic function of tariff distribution. To anticipate, you know, because nobody can really is in the head of the president. So apparently, all you can have is a probabilistic forecast of where the tariff will be. It will be between 0% and 200% apparently. And so my take here is just that to understand that because the economic function is evolving rapidly, not always as rapidly as the tariff in the US, but still rapidly. The problem is that the metric that you have for your teams are something that is going to be revised, once a year? Every 2 years? You know, you're going to drive everybody nuts if you change the way they earn money every month. That's just crazy. So the reality is that people, for psychological safety, they need something that will give them some kind of at least 12 months of projection where they think this is what I earn. But supply chain requires you to think sometimes in a matter of days and to be very reactive. Those things are not compatible. So that's why I say remove those incentives. In practice, it will backfire, if only because you need to update your economic functions much more rapidly that you can revisit your packages that you offer to your your employees, even to your executives.
Well, thank you. All right. 2 points there. One, I think I said Godwin's law. That's a very different thing. It's Goodhart's law is what I meant to say. Those are two very, very different phenomenon. Actually, just some comments coming through. Basically, just agreement. But Miguel Lara pointing out, if you create a KPI that doesn't drive any impact, it's basically just extra work and has no real value at the end of the day.
Agreed.
I presume that aligns with absolute clarity with everyone in the panel.
And by the way, because the thing is that large corporations only think in terms of additive stuff, never subtractive. So whenever there is a indicator of any kind, whether it's a key indicator or a performance indicator or whatever, is just going to be added to the pile. And so fast forward a decade and you have what I call the wall of metrics, which is the 100 numbers that nobody reads. And yet it still frees the business intelligence tool every first day of the month, because they have so much performance indicators to compute. They have like 100 indicators, and the whole BI instance is like frozen for the entire day. I've even seen companies where for the first day of the month, they literally have to stop certain operation to be done because the ERP is halfway frozen. So they would pause, a plant to let the ERP do the reporting.
Well, gentlemen, we've been going for just over an hour. I believe, Patrick, you had mentioned that as a possible out. However, by way of summation, Miguel has commented, just because there are... I'll put this as a summary, and you just give me your closing thoughts relative to this. Just because there are many KPIs doesn't mean you should track all of them at once. You should select only the KPIs that really matter, depending on your approach and current focus. In reverse order, Joannes, your closing thoughts relative to that?
I would say yes and no. The problem is that this is the common wisdom of present companies, if you take it at face value. And the problem is that let's see where this common wisdom got us. In most companies, you have a wall of metrics. You have like literally dozens, if not hundreds, of indicators that nobody care about. It is completely opaque. Nobody even understands. I would say usually you take the average supply chain practitioner, they have a screen with 15 numbers, and they can't even tell the semantic of what is computed for half of them. They would say, oh, this thing, I think it computes the average stock level over the last 30 days. Maybe, I'm not sure. Or something like that. Yeah, okay, or something like that. So I would say this is a common wisdom, but my approach would be much more aggressive, because we know that large organizations tend to accumulate bureaucracy and craft much more easily that you get rid of them. You have to double down on purging, on being merciless and purge your process from all those numbers that are not critical. So again, for typical supply chain executives, our thinking is there is a quota of, let's say, 10 numbers. If above that, you have to remove a number to get a new number in. That's you need to maintain that. And then if we go for the data scientist side, I say you can have hundreds of numbers, but then it's the numerical recipe of the data scientist / supply chain scientist who is doing its own stuff, but the rest of the organization is not on board. It's the fact that data scientists, for their own internal need, have their own super complicated work environment. I would say it's okay, because it's not a tax that the rest of the organization has to pay. It's only a tax that impacts the scientist, data scientist / supply chain scientist, himself or herself, not the rest of the company. So that I would say, this common wisdom, yes, it sounds reasonable, but again, beware. Fast forward a decade, my observation is that usually you end up in a very bad place by following this common wisdom.
All right. Patrick, your closing thoughts? How do you feel about that?
If you have more than 5, you have too many.
Even more strict.
So I'm much more strict. I have 5 specifically that I look at, and they all tie to financial statements, right? So number 1 is a market share metric. I call it brand equity, right? If your sales are growing, but the market's growing faster, you're still losing market share. So don't just track sales, track where you're at in the marketplace. I want to make sure that we're reliably meeting customer demand, right? So there's a reliability metric. I want to make sure that we're effectively allocating our resources. So there's an effectiveness metric. I hate the talk about efficiency, because efficiency always ends up being local optima. So I talk about productivity instead. And then the last one is one I'm still working on. I still don't have a really good metric for it, but it's agility. How quickly can you correspond to the rapid changes we see in the marketplace on a daily basis? And if you cover those 5, I think that covers most of what you want to understand from a business perspective. And of course, there's different ways to look at those, but those are kind of my 5, and they don't have a lot of overlap, and they get to the key things that go to the financials. So.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I don't have any more questions. We've addressed everything in the live chat, and I think we're just about out of time. Joannes, as always, thank you very much for joining me. Patrick, really appreciate you joining us remotely and for your time. Your insights were really great.
Pleasure.
Hopefully we'll be able to do it again sometime.
Thank you.
You bet.
And to everyone else watching, thank you very much for attending, for your private messages, your comments. If you want to continue the discussion, as I always say, reach out to Joannes, me, and Patrick. We're always happy to talk to new people. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week and get back to work.